Nonfiction finalists, Mary Gabriel, Love and Capital, Karl and Jenny Marx and the Birth of a Revolution, published by Little Brown and Company.
Introduce you to a few of my friends. They're much more interesting than I am. Love and Capital is the story of the Marx family, Karl, Jenny, their three daughters who survived into adulthood, and the many ups and downs of their really wild existence in the midst of a revolution that was occurring in Karl Marx's head. So I'm going to start this reading. I'll start this reading when Karl and Jenny have been married for just a few months, and they arrive in Paris. He's a university graduate, but he's unable to get a job because of his politics. And so he decides to become a journalist, though he has shown absolutely no aptitude for this. And he's been hired to co-edit a newspaper in Paris, a German, French language newspaper. Paris, 1843. Throughout history, there have been moments when Paris was the center of the creative universe, and 1843 was one of them. Everyone, whether of real or imagined import, was there, and everyone was politicized. French, German, Russian, Polish, Hungarian, and Italian reformers mingled with painters, poets, novelists, composers, and philosophers who had begun to celebrate the real rather than the ideal in their works. Aristocrats with storied names met revolutionaries with checkered pasts in gilded salons or at secret society covens where plots were hatched to turn kingdoms into nations. Political fugitives surfaced on the velvet banquettes of right bank cafes where they were feted like princes. Decorated soldiers who traded the military for civilian life among the opposition were heralded for their audacity, although the abandonment of their full-dress uniform was deeply lamented by women of fashion. This was King Louis Philippe's Paris, a magnet for radicals from every social stratum throughout Europe. Wrote Friedrich Engels, Paris was quite simply the place where European civilization had reached its fullest bloom. Jenny and Marx rumbled into town after a long coach journey and found themselves in the middle of this carnival. They'd come to Paris because it was free, because writers could say what they liked without threat of censure, but they may have been surprised at what freedom looked like. In Prussia, it had been a mere concept to them, an article of faith, not something experienced. Now they could see it in the bustle of the bourgeoisie, answering the government's challenge to, quote, get rich, and hear it in the voluble, public, and undisguised debate of isms, liberalism, socialism, communism, nationalism, an exclamatory blizzard roaring out of the very city where these movements were born. Neither Karl nor Jenny had ever been so far from home in a place so utterly foreign, and yet both agreed Paris was where they belonged. Almost immediately, they plunged into Parisian life. Jenny, who was devoted to the theater and who, like her mother, adored a crowd, especially loved the opera bouffe that played out on the tree-lined boulevards of the French capital. There, men postured in tight breeches and coats as richly textured and hued as women's finery, and the women, arrayed head to toe in extravagant styles designed to capture attention, feigned to disdain that notice once won. The streets featured a constant, and to an observer like Jenny, comical courtship ritual. It was as if these upper classes had nothing to think about but love, and yet, in the streets around them and serving them in their homes were the people who would one day achieve their downfall. These poor seethed with hatred, but the threat they posed went unnoticed by their social superiors. So secure were they in their delusion that society would be always at their command. After watching her youth slip away year by dreary year while she waited for Karl at her parents' home in Trier, Jenny was finally living the life she had dreamed of. Dr. Karl Marx and his wife mingled easily with Parisian radical and democratic circles, where, for the first time, they were introduced to society as a married couple. Marx was proud of Jenny, proud of her beauty, which even amid the celebrated women of Paris was remarked upon, but also of her intelligence. From the earliest days, he regarded Jenny as an intellectual equal, and that was no mere token sentiment. Marx was ruthless when it came to things of the mind, and he would not have relied on Jenny's judgment if he did not think she was in fact brilliant. Indeed, throughout his life, Marx held only one other person in a position of such high esteem and trust, and that was his alter ego and collaborator, Friedrich Engels. But where Engels understood and supported Marx intellectually, Jenny also humanized him. In private, Marx was warm, loving, kind, and generally described as excellent company when he was not plagued by sleepless nights or stricken by disease, both due to anxiety over his work. In public, however, he was most often fiercely argumentative intellectually arrogant, and notoriously impatient with anyone who disagreed with him. His frequent drinking episodes with colleagues throughout the years in Bonn, Berlin, and Cologne often devolved into verbal, if not physical, fights. He had little time for social niceties. For someone so conceptually fascinated by the alienation of man, Marx routinely alienated those who encountered him. And while the arguments may have invigorated him, they also distracted him. He was happiest buried in his books, which he called his slaves. Marx was an introvert who, despite his best efforts to the contrary, attracted followers because he exuded remarkable self-confidence and leadership. The rich Russian liberal Pavel Annenkov called Marx the embodiment of a democratic dictator who commanded respect in spite of his social clumsiness and shabby exterior. Jenny, however, was expert in the ways of society. In her quiet, refined way, she reassured those who might have been intimidated by her slightly strange species of a husband. On her arm, and only there, the public Marx looked very much like the private Marx, relaxed, funny, at times even frivolous. This cerebral wild man appeared positively tame when his wife was at hand.